Hey everyone, it is 2 o'clock and I think we'll begin now. My name is Rob Elsmont and I'll be your moderator for today's Hireko webinar titled Selecting the Proper Weight Golf Club and Components, a discussion on component weights, overall weight, and swing weight. The webinar will be taught by Hireko's Technical Director, Jeff Summitt. Just a few words about Jeff's biography here. Jeff has worked in all facets of club making and repair since 1984 and has devoted the past 20 years to researching, testing, and analyzing thousands of different golf shafts. He has compiled his findings and research into the Dynamic Shaft Fitting Index, which is featured in the best-selling book, The Modern Guide to Club Making, and Total Club Fitting in the 21st Century. Additionally, he has authored the annual Dynamic Shaft Fitting Addendum, which instructs club fitters in the proper fitting and selection of shafts. Both books are available for sale online at hirekogolf.com. Let me get a few housekeeping items out of the way first. Your audio settings are muted, which means we cannot hear you. And if you have any questions, use the question box located in the upper right-hand corner of your dashboard. If for any reason you must leave the webinar, don't worry. It is being recorded and will be on youtube.com/hirekogolf and on our blog at blog.hirekogolf.com in about 1 hour. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Hireko Golf's Technical Director, Jeff Summitt. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Rob. More importantly, let's thank those attending our webinar. Today's topic is selecting the proper weight golf club and components, as well as a discussion on the individual component masses, overall weight, heft, swing weight, moment of inertia. What has spurred on this topic is the most recent trend toward light golf clubs or component parts, which seem to get a lot of press today. What is the lightweight trend for you? In the time we have today, I want to discuss the concepts of weight and tips on how to select the proper weight and balance to get the most out of your investment and toward a lower score. The first thing we need to do is get a full understanding of what weight is and what purpose it serves. So we'll have to break it down to the individual components, and then finally the club, and then the balance of the weight along the entire length of the golf club. Let's start our conversation on head mass. After all, it's one of the key contributors to how far the ball will go. I should say this now before I confuse any of the listeners out there. The term mass and weight are often loosely interchanged. However, the correct term is mass. Weight is actually a force which factors in the gravitational pull. You probably remember that from science class in middle school. Just in case I screw up and interchange these terms incorrectly, I'm going to apologize up front to our scientific listeners. To give you an example, let's look at drivers. Hopefully I'll not scare you off with a little math today, but I find it useful to get my point across. In the Cochran and Stops book, Search for the Perfect Swing, there's a well-known calculation for ball speed with drivers, assuming that the loft is not much greater than 10 degrees, and of course solid contact is made. If you look at the slide for a moment, you're going to see a variation of this equation. What we're trying to solve for is VB, or the velocity of the ball immediately after impact. VH is the velocity of the head immediately before impact. Most of you understand this as the golfer's club head speed. Next, we have the lowercase m, which is the mass of the ball, or 1.62 ounces, or 46 grams. The uppercase m is the mass of the club head, and the typical range is between 190 and 210 grams with the driver, with 200 being the most common. The next value is E, which is the coefficient of restitution. You know, the rebound or trampoline effect that you often hear about in drivers. Well, for practical purposes, we're going to use the USGA's 0.83 maximum limit as our constant. Why is the mass of the head important? Well, any change in the mass has an effect on overall distance a ball will travel. Think about this for a second. With the same amount of speed, a heavier hammer will drive a nail further than a lighter headed hammer. So let's use a couple of examples to show this effect. The first group of data will show a golfer whose club head speed is 100 miles per hour or 45 meters per second. 200 grams is fairly typical driver weight across the industry, but you do see some variation, especially in Hireko's line. For example, we introduced our Acer XF Leggera driver, which weighs in at only 190 grams, or a 5% reduction in mass compared to a standard driver. From the chart, we can see the results if the club head speed remains the same, or a constant of 100 miles an hour. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But the ball speed will reduce by 1.6 miles per hour, and subsequently there's going to be a reduction in the theoretical distance of less than 3 yards. Of course, this is assuming that all other factors are the same, such as the loft, length, etc. Now, Hireko also offers a club head concept called the Thriver, which weighs 210 grams, or 5% greater for added control. The Acer XDS Insider Thriver and the just recent released Acer XF Thriver are examples of this. Even though they're higher lofted, we can still use the example to illustrate the difference when it comes to weight. Again, we're going to assume all other factors are the same, such as the loft, length, etc. Now, the 210-gram driver would increase the ball speed immediately after impact by 1.3 miles per hour, which in turn would increase the theoretical distance by a little over 2 yards. Let's see what happens when we reduce the club head speed down to 80 miles an hour. Well, as you can see from the chart here, the difference in ball speed and distance aren't monumental changes. So why even bother caring about head weight to begin with? Maybe that's why most drivers are a fixed weight with just a narrow range, or why there's only a few heads manufactured in multiple weight options or with adjustable weights. And even those people who have clubs with adjustable weights rarely ever change them from the factory settings or purchase additional weights to experiment with. Well, we got a lot to go over today, so we're going to revisit some of those questions a little bit later. Now, maybe we should be looking at a different component, such as a putter head, to get our point across. Most golfers take the putter for granted, even though it accounts for approximately 40% of our shots. Here's a good argument why you should look carefully at putter mass the next time you're thinking of picking up a new flat stick. Now, the equation is the same as you saw from our previous slide, but the constants change a little, most notably the mass of the putter head. The most common putter head weight is in the 340 to 350 gram range. But if you look hard enough, you're going to find some inexpensive zinc putters as light as 295 grams. And on the opposite extreme, you can find putter heads that have a mass of 420 grams and beyond, proving that there's a lot of variety today. One other variable that changes is the coefficient of restitution, which is approximately 0.8 on a putter. So we're going to use that as our constant on all our examples. The first group of data on the left shows a golfer whose club head speed with the putter is 4 miles an hour, or 1.8 meters per second just prior to impact. This is almost fast enough to sink a level 10-foot putt on a typical or average speed green. Using 4 miles per hour as a constant, the 320-gram putter head will propel the ball and rest just shy of about 9 feet 8 inches from where it began. And by increasing the weights in 20-gram intervals, you can see that we're slowly inching closer and closer to the hole with the same amount of speed. On the right, we have a 20-foot putt on a level green of average speed. It might require 8.3 mile per hour club head speed to hold the putt. A stroke with the 320-gram putter may result into missing the putter just short of the hole, while the 340-gram putter will barely roll the ball in the cup. Now, at 400 grams, the ball may be going too fast prior to the hole that it won't fall in or not take any break and possibly lip out. The point I'm trying to make is putter head weight is important for a couple of reasons. So here's a few tips when you go to select a new putter. Some people like the ball to die in the hole, and I, for one, am guilty of that. Partially because the course that I played, I learned the game on, penalized you from going past the hole and often created a more difficult comeback putt. But when you're constantly short of the hole, this is just as bad. You might want to check your putter head weight that you're currently using. And then all you do is simply pick another model that has more mass to it. There's a term that you might have heard that states never up, never in. That simply means that if you never hit the ball hard enough, it's never going to get to the hole and you'll never make the putt. So if you're a little past the hole, that's probably going to be just fine. But if you're long past the hole on a consistent basis, then a lighter putter head model is going to help you hold more putts. And if you play the same course all the time, you can get a quick read on what putter head suits you best. But if you travel from course to course, you may want to have a couple different putters to choose from. The reason is most of you probably don't have the luxury of the time to putt on the practice green before the round to get a feel of just how fast or slow the greens are. Sure, you might roll a few just to get a feel, but you're not going to get dialed in. So chances are you're going to go on the first green, you're going to look at the distance from you to the hole, and in that split second, take the putter back and stroke the putt with the force that you would normally use on your home course or the one you play the most often. If the greens are slow on that day, then you're going to be probably short all day long. On the other hand, if the greens are lightning fast, you'll probably wish you had left the head cover on because the ball is going to be racing past the hole with your normal stroke. And for many golfers, it's hard to adjust to these changes in green speed and make those changes on the fly. With a backup putter of a different head mass, it might help solve some of those issues when you travel to a different course. And if you go to a golf retail store with a putting green, there may be a plethora of putters to choose from. After a while, you might find one that rolls the ball and you control the distance well. Well, guess what? The first thing you're feeling is the head weight that complements your stroke, at least on that particular practice green. Selecting what weight you need is a universal problem, regardless of subject. To give you an example, let's look outside of golf for a moment and pick another sport such as bowling. Well, what's the first thing you need to go bowling? Well, that's easy. It's the ball. If you're like me and don't own your own ball, you go into the bowling alley staring at a bunch of balls on a rack trying to decide which one to use. Well, the color of the ball might steer you to a particular one versus another. It's going to be the weight that ultimately you decide which one to use. The rule of thumb in bowling is to select the heaviest ball you can comfortably use while maintaining the proper speed. The funny part is, in golf, we don't talk about selecting the heaviest club, rather the lightest one we can control. And when we hold two different drivers to compare, we feel its weight immediately. The difference between a heavier and a lighter driver isn't the head weight, as you might think, rather it's the shaft. And why? Well, remember that most drivers are the same number of wood or iron, pretty much weigh the same from one manufacturer to another. So the biggest difference you feel is actually in the shaft weight, unless, of course, one was shorter or longer than normal. Okay, a quick question here. Which weighs more, an 85-gram steel shaft or an 85-gram graphite shaft? Well, obviously the answer is they weigh the same. The graphite or composite shafts were first introduced as a way to lighten the overall weight of the club so it could be swung faster. And as advances in materials and fabrication came about, it's now possible to produce much lighter weight shafts today, even in steel. If we look at the weight of a cut steel shaft in a mid-iron, let's say like a number 5, you can find weights that range from as low as 77 grams to as high as 122 grams. Remember that 28.35 grams is 1 ounce, so for those metrically challenged out there. So the amounts to a little bit more than an 1.5 ounce difference. That's a lot when we look at altering the weight of any golf club. When we look at graphite shafts for irons, we could find shafts where the cut weight of a mid-iron will be in between 50 and 110 grams, or close to 2 ounces difference. Interestingly, there are steel shafts that weigh that are lighter than some graphite shafts. So you want to pay more attention to the weight rather than the materials today. Now, much of the focus that you see is on lighter drivers. Well, here the shaft has been the primary factor. It's been some time since you last saw a steel shaft offered in woods, although a few steel shafts still exist. But when we talk about drivers in particular, we're looking at graphite shafts. And the most popular range is between 60 and 70 grams. That's the weight range that most golfers are comfortable with, plus they're easy enough to make cost efficiently. In the past couple of years, the shaft weights have been trending more toward the 50-gram range. Now you're seeing more and more shafts becoming available in the 40-gram range. However, those lighter weight shafts are much more expensive to produce. And if you look hard enough, you'll find aftermarket shafts in the low 40-gram territory all the way to 104-gram model. Yep, that's in the same range as you would find a lightweight steel shaft. That's, again, a little bit more than a 2-ounce difference. The next component to look at is the grip. And for years and years and years, 50 grams was a standard men's grip. Occasionally you'd find exceptions, but they usually didn't last very long. In the 1970s, larger size butt-end steel shafts required special, thinner-walled and lighter grips installed onto them. Now the reduction in wall thickness of not only the shaft, but the grip too, resulted in more harsh vibrations transmitted to the golfer's hands. As a result, the shafts and grips didn't last long in the market. In the 1990s and early 2000s, large butt graphite shafts were introduced, some as large as 1 inch in diameter. Again, thin-walled slip-on grips or synthetic straps were required. Well, I probably should rephrase that a little bit. There are a few shafts that required no grip at all. This was done to save mass with the idea that the club could be swung faster and the ball would go further. The demise of the large butt graphite shafts was due to several things. One was the lack of variety in the grips. Secondly was the difficulty of installation of at least the slip-on models. Lastly, you couldn't really customize their sizing. Now, if you conduct a lot of regripping in your shop, you may encounter some of these larger butt shafts and find yourself unable to replace the grip for your customer. But once again, there's a renewed interest in lightweight grips. But this time around, it's now possible to reduce the weight by using less dense materials, as Win has done in their Win Light series. These grips weigh half as much, or a mere 25 grams for a men's standard size model, without having to resort to larger diameter shafts and thinner wall grips. Now, the shafts are about as light as they could be made at present. Grip weight has become the new frontier to further reduce the club's weight. Plus, it's far cheaper to put a 25-gram grip onto a club than it is to shed 25 grams from a shaft to achieve the same weight savings. Even though you hear a lot about lightweight grips or light in general, surprisingly, the golf industry has ventured into a much more diverse range of weights than ever before. Larger putter grips become more popular to help take the wrist out of play for a more pendulum stroke. Now, this phenomenon is carried over into the non-putter grip category too. One series of grips are even larger than the traditional jumbo grips and weigh as much as 105 grams, or double that of a normal size grip. Now, I don't want to confuse or mislead you, because the difference in weight between the lightest and heaviest grip has to do with their size. The lightest grip, which is 20 grams, is a lady's size, while the 105-gram grip is a super jumbo size. And unlike shafts, which can vary by 60 grams and still be the same flex, these two grips wouldn't be used or even recommended for the same type player. Putter grips can also widely range in weight by over 200 grams. That's right. That's more than the combined differences in the head and the shaft weights. Again, the weight is dictated by size, with smaller grips being the lightest and super jumbo being the heaviest. Plus, you have to compare rubber grips to other rubber grips and synthetic grips to synthetic grips in size and their weight. There's some lightweight, low-density grips that are jumbo size, yet weigh the same as a grip much smaller in size. Okay. Now that we've gone over all the individual component masses, now I want to talk about overall mass. It's the total combined masses of the head, shaft, grip, and even the club making supplies to build the club. Overall mass, okay, let's just call it weight, sometimes called static weight. Club building supplies are such things as the ferrule, epoxy, grip tapes, and swing weighting materials. The latter could be lead, brass, or tungsten tip pins for balancing out the tolerances in the set. So lead foil tape someone may put on the head to increase the weight, or even counterweights at the butt end or anywhere along the mid-length of the club. And I'll talk about those items later. When we talk about the overall weight of a driver, it's common to see the driver in the 320-gram range, or slightly more than 11¼ ounces. If we break it down, you can see that we have our 200-gram head, 65-gram shaft, 50-gram grip, and 5 grams for the miscellaneous club making supplies. In contrast, a typical steel shafted 5-iron with a dynamic gold shaft may weigh 425 grams or 15 ounces, and that breaks down to our 256-gram head, 114-gram cut steel shaft, 50-gram grip, and 5 grams for those miscellaneous club making supplies. Now, each club becomes progressively heavier the shorter it is in the set. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But why is it important to choose the correct overall weight club or components to build a club? Well, let's go back to our bowling example. What happens if we were to pick too heavy of a ball? Well, one of the telltale signs will be frustration, which is going to lead to low scores. The player is going to become fatigued and possibly even cause injury to themselves or others. Now let's go to a different sport. If you were to Google how to select a tennis racket, one of the critical choices is selecting the correct weight. Well, guess what? If you pick the wrong weight, what's going to occur? Well, the list includes frustration, poor scoring, fatigue, and even injury. Have you ever heard of tennis elbow? Well, that's caused by using the wrong weight for your game. Many professionals prefer to use heavier overall tennis rackets because they're more control orientated. There's a lot of crossover when you look at golf. On the men's circuits like the PGA and the Nationwide Tour, the shafts that they use in their woods are often heavier than the standard 60-gram models used in the stock clubs for the general public. It's not surprising to see them use 70, 80, and even 90-gram graphite shafts. Game improvement tennis rackets feature oversized heads and are lighter weight and longer. Does that sound familiar? Well, it sounds like a game improvement golf club. The lightness is needed for those with slower swings for more power and maneuverability. Now, what happens when you use the wrong overall weight golf club? Well, I bet you can guess. Frustration in the game leads to higher scores, possibly fatigue, and injury to oneself, or possibly property like a condo window or a windshield in the parking lot from a stray golf ball. Most golfers assume the overall weight is what dictates just how fast we could swing a club, at least on the surface. When we pick up a golf club at the grip end, the first thing we feel is the heft, or what you're basically testing is the weight. Remember what I said before about weight, that it's a force. What you're feeling is the torque about the wrist, or the first moment of inertia. The first moment of inertia is a force produced by the center of mass of an object located at a particular distance away. We still need to factor that we hold the club approximately 5 inches down on the grip. In this example, we show a club supported at less than horizontal to the ground, or similar how you might hold a golf club. The center of mass, or the balance point of the club, is indicated in this diagram, and that distance is 23 inches from our hands. The balance point can easily be found by balancing the club on your finger or some other object. If the weight of this driver is 11 1/4 ounces or 319 grams, the first moment of inertia is going to be 258.75 ounces. This is a measure of the heft or weight of the club as we feel it when we pick up the club. I should probably note that if you're trying to plug in numbers here, you'll need to factor in the angle that the club is held at. So it might be easier to calculate if you hold the club parallel to the ground. Now I want you to understand an important concept about weight. How can the same weight object feel lighter? Well, if you don't believe me, then pick up this same club, but from the head end. It's going to feel much lighter. Remember, the mass of the club hasn't changed at all. It's where that mass is located relative to your hands that makes all the difference. As you can see from this diagram, the balance point's only 3 inches in front of the hands rather than 23 inches when held at the same angle. And by virtue of the weight being closer to the hands, it feels lighter, when in fact, the mass has never changed. Again, it's just not weight, but where that weight is. Another type of weight that you hear about is swing weight. Swing weight works on the same principles as we discussed, as it is a measure of the overall weight, balance point, and distance to the fulcrum point. There's even a specific scale to measure the forces, so you could do so without the math. Now the fulcrum or pivot point is slightly different on a swing weight scale than when you hold a golf club. As I mentioned before, you hold a golf club about 5 inches down from the grip, like how you're going to swing it. But the swing weight scale measures at a point 14 inches from the grip end. Now this is the same club as before in our example. The overall weight is 11 1/4 ounces. The balance point is 33 inches from the end of the grip, or 19 inches in front of the fulcrum point. Now if we multiply our mass times the length from the fulcrum point, this produces a moment of 213.75 ounce-inches. Again, this is a measure of the heft or weight of the club as we feel it when we pick up the club. Well, sort of, because the pivot point is slightly different than when we hold it in our hands, but at least it's consistent from club to club. And instead of saying that the club has a swing weight of 213.75 ounce-inches, there's a conversion which makes it easier to say. And in this case, the 213.75 converts to a D0 swing weight. And for each swing weight, higher or lower, there's a 1.75 inch-ounce difference. To put that in perspective, approximately 2 grams of head weight is one swing weight. It's closer to 1.6 grams for a 45-inch driver and closer to 2.3 grams for a wedge. That's why 2 grams is used as an approximation. Let's say in our example that the head weight was 200 grams. Well, what happens if we changed it to 190 grams, like in our Acer XF Leggera at the same length? Well, if it takes 1.6 grams of head weight for one swing weight at 45 inches, and we're reducing the head weight by 10 grams, the swing weight's going to reduce by 6 points down to C4, which is going to feel much lighter in our hands. Now, what happens if we go to the opposite extreme and use a heavier driver like our Acer XF Thriver, which weighs 210 grams? Well, the additional 10 grams of head weight will increase the swing weight by 6 points and now becomes D6. And for some, this will cause the club to be too head heavy. There's one other major factor that alters swing weight, and that is length. For every ½ inch in length, this changes the swing weight by approximately 3 points. This is, again, another reason why, as the clubs become shorter, that the head weight increases. If we simply made that 190-gram head 1 inch longer, or 46 inches, we'd add back our 6 swing weights and go back to D0 swing weight. And conversely, if on our 210-gram head example, if we shorten the club by 1 inch down to 44 inches, we would reduce the swing weight by 6 points and back down to our D0 swing weight. Now you can see how this is all tied in. This is the reason why manufacturers suggest certain lengths based on the components they use so they feel the same in your hands. In the chart are the corresponding lengths and head weights that are often used to make a match set. And I should note that the driver, the fairways, and the hybrids are graphite shafted, while the irons, wedges, and putter are all steel shafted, because this is the most common that you see in sets today. Now it's the same with shafts too. As most of the shaft hangs over the fulcrum point on a swing weight scale, or is forward to your hands, any change in the mass influences the feel. If you select a lighter shaft, the swing weight, overall weight, and the first moment of inertia all reduce. Now it takes about 7 grams of shaft weight, given that the balance point of the shafts remain the same and the length remains 45 inches. But at lengths shorter than 45 inches, the weight required to change one swing weight increases proportionally. For manufacturers, they would rather alter the length than to have to manufacture a heavier head when using a lighter shaft. This is another reason why you're seeing that the lengths are increasing. Grip weight also has an influence on swing weighting, but I want to address this separately a little bit later in the webinar. However, if you ever want to see a full discussion on swing weighting, we have a webinar on that too. You can find it by going to YouTube or searching our blog. Now, why are more and more drivers becoming not only lighter and lighter, but longer too? Well, that's an easy answer, and that's to give you added speed and leverage so you can hit the ball further. This is not only happening with drivers, but also trickling into the other club categories. It's simple physics. You've all seen this formula many times before, that force equals mass times acceleration. And all acceleration is velocity over a given period of time. However, we're only concerned with that split second prior to impact. so we can concentrate on the velocity. Most of you understand that if you can swing the club faster, you can hit the ball further. But there's a caveat to that. You still have to make solid contact. Now, backpedaling to a discussion we had earlier in the webinar, can a lighter or heavier head get a help or hurt distance? Well, it all depends on whether the change in weight can be compensated in the velocity and the acceleration. Using our 200-gram head as our baseline, if one were to swing a 10.5-degree driver solidly at 100 miles per hour, then the ball speed would be approximately 149 miles per hour and result into a 253-yard drive. We stated that reducing the head weight by 5% or 10 grams would reduce the distance at the same speed. But the whole idea of using lighter weight heads is to be able to use a longer length club at a reduced overall weight. And as long as we're able to generate an increase of more than 1% in velocity, and that's only 1 mile an hour here, then the ball's going to travel further. On the flip side, let's look at using the heavier head weight. Chances with the heavier head, the manufacturer is going to suggest a shorter length, as I explained when we talked about swing weighting. And as long as a person doesn't generate less than 1% of their speed at impact, they should not see any decrease in their distance. Now, a shorter driver is generally recommended for someone who struggles with a normal length driver. So even if the velocity is slightly less, the distance may be more than made up for in solidness of contact. Now, the next topic I want to touch upon is the second moment of inertia, or the force you feel when you waggle the club back and forth with your wrists. The second moment of inertia is the sum of all the individual component weights and their distances squared from the center of rotation, plus the moment of inertia of each piece around its own center of gravity. Now, this might be the most important consideration of all when you swing the golf club. To explain this, let's look at the diagram for a moment. On the left side is a player holding our 11.25-ounce driver. The center of mass, or the balance point, is located 33 inches from the butt end, or 28 inches from the hands. Now take a look at the right side of this diagram now. Here we've added 10 grams of weight to the head to that same club. And not only is the club going to be heavier by 10 grams, but the balance point is going to be moved further from the hands. And this is going to increase the swing weight by close to 6 points. The mass is now, 11.6 ounces, and the center of mass is now 29 inches from the hands, or an inch lower. Now the extra weight adds approximately 624 inches squared to the second moment of inertia, or the club minus the extra weight. Now the higher second moment of inertia will be harder to waggle with our wrist. So it's something to think about. So to see the importance of this, let's turn the slide here for a second. What you'll see from this slide is an experiment I did with a range of golfers from a 3 handicap up to a 36. We used 3 different weight 5-irons with all things else being equal. I wanted to see what would happen to swing speed by changing head weight. You'll see impact decals as these were hit with different with the 3 different head weights. The left column is our graphite shafted 5-iron that weighs 257 grams, or standard weight. The swing weight was C6 due to its length. Now in the middle column is a head that weighed 267 grams, and its swing weight was D1. The third column is going to represent a 277 gram 5-iron, resulting into a D6 swing weight at the length that we made these clubs at. The really surprising part was that the swing speed barely even changed by more than 1 mile per hour with all these golfers with the 3 different weight heads. Now, that really shouldn't come as a surprise because, after all, our bodies can only torque so much around our spine so fast at a particular given length. What was more surprising was how the head weight influenced the solidness of contact on the face. Some golfers fared well with a lighter swing weight and others heavier. And handicap had no factor on head weight. It was strictly on an individual basis. And to see what might work best for you, lead foil tape is available to apply to the head. It's easy to remove, but one word of caution here. 1 strip of tape won't do anything. You'll need to add a lot to see and feel any difference. Okay. You may have heard the term releasing the club. It's basically the uncocking of the wrist on the downswing. Not only how much mass you're swinging, but also where the center of mass is located is very critical to when and where you release the golf club. Releasing or uncocking the wrist too early, and it's going to cause a rapid decline in the power because maximum club head speed was achieved too early and the club is decelerating going into impact. This can be caused by the MOI being too high. Think about this for a second. If the club is too head light or the MOI is too low, there might not be enough resistance to release the club at the right moment, causing control problems. But somewhere there's a happy medium that allows one to release the club at the right moment just before impact, maximize speed, and encourage the solidness of contact. Another type of weight is the use of alternative weighting principles to alter the overall weight and balance of the golf club. Once a taboo subject, counterweighting is becoming a little bit more mainstream than what it used to be. Now, some may argue that alternative weighting is only a quick fix for a poorly fitted golf club. On the other hand, you can't deny in some cases it can make a great difference. For instance, I'm not sure if you know it or not, but the great Jack Nicklaus had his clubs counterweighted throughout his career. Now, counterweighting is simply placing weight above the hands to move the center of mass closer to the hands. In our diagram here, we show the before and after. The after on the right shows the addition of 16 grams of counterweight. Not only is this going to add 16 grams of mass to the club, but it moves the balance point 1 inch closer to the hands. And this would also reduce the swing weight by 4 points as well. And the mass is 11.81 ounces. And the center of mass is 27 inches from the hands. Remember before it was 28 inches. Yeah, we've added weight, but the second moment of inertia will stay essentially the same since the weight is so close to the hands. The balance point moved closer to the hands, which should make it easier to waggle the club back and forth at the wrists. Now, I've seen cases where the counterweight works, and other times it's a disaster for a player. It makes a perfectly good golf club go bad. The other day I was testing an individual unaware of what I was handing him. I handed him a 45-inch driver with a 60-gram shaft and a 50-gram grip with head weights that range from 190, 195, and 200 grams. In all cases, he felt like he had to wait on the golf club, not because it was too flexible, rather it was too light. And consequently for him, the ball flights were all weak fades. Next, I took each of those same clubs and added a 26-gram counterweight. Now, instantly that player noticed a positive change to the feel of the club, and the ball flight went straighter and further. So by adding 26 grams to the club, the player made a better swing and distance was increased. I've done this experiment with many people, and each person responds to it differently. Even those that saw a huge benefit in the driver found that that same amount of counterweight in another club, like a mid-iron or putter or whatever, broke down the swing and created a power vacuum, one that cost the player dearly in distance, height, and feel. I want to go back to grip weight for a second, because this is almost the same as counterweighting. Instead of a plug, the mass of a grip is extended over a 10 or 10.5-inch length, but the center of mass is still very close to the hinge point of the hands. About a year ago, I conducted a 3-club challenge on identical 5-irons, except for the grip. One had a 57-gram mid-size grip, one had a 26-gram mid-size wind light grip, and a third had a 57-gram mid-size grip, but with a 20-gram counterweight to it. Now this created a 51-gram or almost 2-ounce change between the clubs. Well, I enlisted several players, and almost all said the same thing. They felt by holding them in their hands, even though there was an 11 swing weight differential, that they felt the same. Again, this is the first moment of inertia, and grip weight will have little influence. The only noticeable difference was the texture of the wind light grips over the other two. Next, we hit balls with each one to see if there's any difference in ball flight, solidness of contact, and so forth, as well as the feel. Now, there was one golfer I remembered saying that the club with the 26-gram grip felt stiffer, and that the club with the 57-gram grip and the 20-gram counterweight felt the most flexible, even though they weren't. However, he said nothing of the weights of the golf clubs. It's interesting how perception of feel can change amongst different individuals. There are also subtle differences in impacts on the face and ball flights by changing only the grip weight. And remember, that's just grip weight, not its size. One last thing I'd like to mention about grip weights. If you use lighter weight grips, make sure that the swing weight is higher than normal. If not, that center of mass in the second MOI may not be sufficient enough to feel during your downswing. Similar to counterweighting, or another form of alternative weighting, is what I like to refer to as mid-weighting. Mid-weighting is positioning weight or mass somewhere between the hands or the wrists and the club head. Now, we can add weight to the head with lead tape or maybe even heavier screws. But we can also add weight onto the shaft or inside with a little creativity. As long as the weight remains permanent, it's within the rules of golf. If we take that same 16 grams we used in our previous example and place it 14 inches from the butt end, or 4 inches below the grip, a few things are going to change. One, we added 16 grams of mass to the club. Second, it moved the balance point closer to the hands. However, it doesn't change the swing weight. And why? Well, remember that the fulcrum point on a swing weight scale is 14 inches from the butt end. So the mass is now 11.81 ounces, and the center of mass is, let's say, 27.3 inches from the hands, producing the second moment of inertia that's nominally higher than without the counterweight. The second moment of inertia is nearly identical to a club without any additional mass. And I find this useful when the overall weight of the club is too light and the player seems to hit the ball all over the place. In another experiment, I added a 40-gram midweight to a wedge that could be slid up and down the shaft and fastened so it would stay in place when hitting a golf ball. Placed it just below the grip, the bottom of the grip on the club. And with the additional weight, the ball flight was observed. Not surprising was the flight was straight and created a tight shot pattern. After all, it is a heavier club. However, this player hit the ball further by an average of 10 to 15 yards than without the weight. Now we took that same club and moved the 40-gram weight 4 inches down on the shaft, just 4 inches. All of a sudden, a club that weighed the same and went long, straight, had a tight shot pattern, the player started to shank the ball and then had one that just would have airmailed his target. Again, it's just not the weight, but where that weight is located. By moving that second mass further from the hands, the second MOI increased and made it harder to square up that club face. And before you purchase your next components or your next assembled club, you should literally weigh your options. On this slide, you're going to see a matrix of overall weight and swing weight. For instance, you can have a club that's both heavy and head heavy. An example is if you're using a heavier weight shaft and the swing weight would have been high due to its length, making it longer, that is. Or using a heavier head, or even adding a midweight. The opposite extreme would be to have an overall lightweight and also be head light. This is going to occur if you have a very light shaft along with a shorter length and possibly a lighter head. You can also create a heavy club that's head light, and this is possible by counterweighting. And lastly, you could create a light head that's head heavy. You could do this by selecting a light shaft, and you can match it up by using a heavier head, a lighter grip, and or a longer length. In each of these scenarios, you should really be able to see a distinctive ball flight difference. For some, a club that's going to be too head heavy may cause a push, and too head light may create a pull. While a heavier club may give you more distance, a lighter one might give you a little bit more, well, a heavier club will give you more accuracy. A lighter one may give you more distance. Now, somewhere in between on that matrix will give you your best accuracy and distance. And the more varied you're able to look at different clubs, the better off you're able to find where you fit into. Remember, what works for one person may work the opposite for another. And I've witnessed many times over the years that a club that's too light might cause a severe slice for one player, and the next person, it just creates a hellacious pull. And it all has to come down to the timing due to the weight. Now, how do you find out on your own? Well, it could be simple, cheap, and even fun to experiment with. Now, here's some of the items that you can use to quickly check if you have the right weight clubs. We mentioned before about adding lead tape to the head. If you have a head that has removable screws, that also serves the same purpose. Now, with a few strips, that's really not going to be enough of lead tape. Usually it's going to take about 2 to 3 swing weight changes minimum, because that's probably the threshold for most players to start to feel. And that might be approximately 9 to 13 inches of half-inch wide lead tape cut and then applied layer by layer over the back of the head. And for a midweight, there are items that you can add to the shaft as a quick way to check if you have the right weight. I find that lead tape is equally effective. Just don't add a gram or two. you need to add more in the neighborhood of at least 10 grams to see a difference. And the great thing is you can remove it easily from the shaft. But if you have to add 10 grams to your shaft and it produces greater results, you know you've selected the wrong weight shaft. You want to place that weight 4 inches or so below the grip, because one, the swing weight's not going to change, and that's going to be an added bonus when trying to limit the other variables. Now, the last one here, counterweights. These are going to be the most difficult to experiment with because you don't want to have to remove the grip, put a back weight in, and then reinstall the grip. Now, there are some commercially available products from Balance Certified and Tour Lock to assist in finding how much weight, if any, works best. And for a cheap experiment, you can use a slender object with a head on it, like a door hinge pictured here to the right. It could be slid inside the butt end through the vent cap and easily be removed. Plus, when you go to hit a ball, it's not going to come falling out. As you can see here, there's a lot more to weight than meets the eyes. Weight not only affects potentially how far you might hit the ball, but how straight too. And a lighter club doesn't always guarantee that you're going to generate more speed and more distance. It's much more complicated than that. For each individual, there's going to be a certain amount of weight and balance point which affects your timing and rhythm. And there's no substitute to experimenting and sometimes by unconventional means to find out what works best for you and toward a lower score. Now, picking the wrong weight can lead to a number of maladies, one of which is frustration with the game. This game is already hard enough, so it's worth the extra effort to find out what weight works best for you. And for fitters, here's another issue. You probably have an arsenal of demo clubs with various weight shafts. However, entering into the alternative weighting takes time and money for both you and your customer. Plus, what works well in one club doesn't always translate to the whole set or even adjacent clubs. And as a club maker, you have to consider how and what you might charge for this type of unconventional fitting. Plus, are your customers even asking for even this type of service? But you never know. This could be the next frontier into fitting. Now, whether you're bowling, playing tennis, or golf, selecting the right weight goes a lot toward the enjoyment of the game. Now, I hope you learned more about weight today. So let's turn this back over to Rob, and we can field your questions in the time we have remaining. That is, if there is any time remaining.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was a wonderful webinar. Guys, I'm sorry, but we're out of time. We've hit our 3 o'clock mark. And Jeff, can you go to the very last screen? And
yes,
you can have your email displayed there. So, folks, look at Jeff's stuff. You can direct all your questions to jsummit@hirekogolf.com. It's on near the bottom of your screen there. And he'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So once again, thanks so much, folks, for attending. Thank you, Jeff. Any last words?
Nope. Sorry, I was a little wordy today, but there was a lot to go over.
No, it was extreme. It was one of the most enlightened webinars I think we've ever had. Just a great webinar. Thanks again, guys, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.